Widespread clear blue skies, a crisp winter's day, but feeling very cold. Most of us not seeing temperatures higher than 1 or 2 degrees Celsius. That northerly flow of air will be staying with us throughout the entirety of next week, so further cold weather is on the cards. Bye-bye.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious?
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show. It's our first here at the new GB News studio in Westminster. And what a busy first week back in Parliament we've seen. The row over the Post Office Horizon scandal marches on, and we've seen former CEO Paula Venables hand back her CBE. The US and the UK have launched strikes against Houthi rebels in Yemen as they continue to attack shipping in the Red Sea. And there's another row brewing on the Tory benches, with MPs set to debate and vote on the amendments to the government's Rwanda bill next week. We've got a whole host of expert guests to talk us through all of it. I'll be joined by the Defence Minister James Cartledge. Was the government right to approve those strikes on the Houthi rebels this week? And does the UK military even have the capability to be a real player in the Middle East anymore? The man hoping to be the UK's next Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, joins me in the studio after Labour revealed this week that they want to bring in supervised toothbrushing for primary-age children. I'll be asking him whether this is nanny state politics. I'll get the thoughts of the Mayor of the West Midlands, Andy Street, on the post office scandal. After South Africa brought genocide charges against the Israeli government at the International Criminal Court this week, I'll be joined by Israel's spokesman Eylon Levy. And I'll be joined by Labour MP Liam Byrne. He famously wrote that note, "There's no money left," when he left government in 2010. Does he regret it now? Let's get straight into the newspapers now with Nigel Nelson, GB News' senior political commentator. He's also the former political editor of the Sunday People and the Sunday Mirror. Good morning, Nigel.
Good morning,
Lovely to see you. Let's talk about the Red Sea standoff then. We've got the Sunday Telegraph. Lord Cameron's written for the newspaper. We've sent an unambiguous message to the Houthis. Your attacks have to stop. He seems to be threatening further action, Nigel.
I think it's explicit. He's saying that if they don't stop, that he certainly will. That we certainly will authorise further action. President Biden said the same thing. So really, the ball is now in the Houthis' court. If they stop, then we stop. If they don't, then these attacks are going to carry on.
But it is divisive, isn't it? We've seen a number of Labour MPs, including Jeremy Corbyn, of course, disagree with the taking of this military action. Sunday Telegraph, page 5, pro-Palestinian marchers back Houthi rebels. Now, I find this quite unbelievable. Got people over here living with the freedoms of the Western world, living in London, enjoying life in a democracy, supporting Houthi rebels. Do these people understand who the Houthis are? Perhaps you can explain for us, Nigel, whether these people are progressive free thinkers, because I don't think they are.
No, I don't think they're sort of Liberal Democrats or anything like that.
No.
They're a 20,000-strong Shia militia. That's the fighting side of it. They seem to have quite a bit of support in Yemen. But the kind of ideology that they support is that sort of espoused by ISIS, by Hamas. So they're not sort of very cuddly. However, they're not a prescribed terrorist organisation in this country.
Should they be?
Well, I mean, I would imagine that we'll be looking at that from now in the future, but they're not at the moment. So, of course, if the protesters are actually backing the Houthis, they won't face arrest in the same way they would have done if they'd backed Hamas.
How does Keir Starmer handle this one? Asking you with your former sort of mirroring people hat on, Nigel, because he said in the past that he wouldn't support any military action without a parliamentary vote. Obviously, there wasn't one this week. The Speaker of the House of Commons, Lindsay Hoyle, was consulted, and he did say that he would happily recall Parliament if necessary. That hasn't happened. The Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, said it was ludicrous for the likes of Corbyn and others to call for a parliamentary vote or discussion in advance of the attacks, because, of course, that would warn the Houthis that they were coming. Where do you think Keir Starmer lies in this debate? How does he play it to keep both sides of the Labour Party happy?
Well, first of all, I think the Houthis knew were coming because we kept saying so if they didn't stop attacking ships. As far as the Labour Party is concerned, what Keir Starmer has said is he's perfectly happy for going to war on the basis of the royal prerogative, which means that Parliament doesn't have to be consulted about it. The problem, I think, and I think this is for the left, is that the convention about consulting Parliament is all over the place. So there was a vote in Parliament for invading Iraq in 2003, no vote for sending troops to Helmand in 2006, vote on Syria on bombing Syria in 2013, which the government lost and therefore didn't go ahead with it, and then we bombed Syria in 2018 without a vote. So at the moment, the one thing I think they've got to do is actually work out what this convention should be. My own view is that there should be a vote in Parliament if there is likely to be a significant loss of British lives. Sending 4 planes to bomb 2 targets probably doesn't qualify for that.
Also, I'll be asking James Cartledge, the Defence Minister, later on the show, whether we have got the military capabilities for this, because
There's
obviously
also
there's
that.
been concerns about the staffing of our frigates and support vessels in the Red Sea. Let's move on to the next biggest story in the papers. It's still running and running, isn't it, Nigel? We're calling it a first-class crisis, the post office scandal. The Express front page, Minister, jail post office bullies. This is coming from Kevin Hollingrake. There's also been a call from Sir David Davis that some of those implicated in the post office scandal should actually face criminal charges themselves. What do you think of that, Nigel?
Well, I mean, this is the Post Office Minister who's making that point. David Davis sort of flashes it out by saying what you could charge them with is perverting the course of justice, which would look like a way to actually get them into court. My own view is that I think we wait till the end of the public inquiry.
Yes.
It should report by towards the end of this year. I think you need to see the evidence there. There's a bit of a knee-jerk reaction going on. People are understandably absolutely furious now they've realised the full scandal of the Post Office. But at the moment, not to actually go gung-ho and try and take people's bonuses away and put them in jail or things like that. The answer is see what the public inquiry comes up with. Prosecutions may well follow.
Although there are yet more revelations this morning. There's a story about having Tony Blair having signed off Horizon, even though there were concerns about Fujitsu and that IT programme actually worked, that it might have had bugs in the system. He signed it off, apparently suggesting that if he didn't, there would be problems with relations with Japan. Meanwhile, we also hear from the Times, the Sunday Times, the front page headline reads, Venables given CBE despite Horizon fears. So this is Theresa May apparently waving through this honour, even though some said, actually, is this the right thing to do when we've got this scandal ongoing?
Well, it was actually the Honours Committee at the time who waved it through, and they're the ones who would face the criticism, and they were warned about it. There was somebody on the Honours Committee who was not happy about the honour being given. There are no clean hands in this. Yeah, as you say, you've mentioned Tony Blair. He was Prime Minister when the Horizon system was introduced, knowing that there were things wrong with it, that a lot of postmasters, even at that stage back in 1999, were saying, look, this is not working properly. So if you look all the way through, there are a number of ministers, prime ministers, all who've had their hands on it. Theresa May becomes the latest one. So I think it's very difficult to... this goes back to what I was saying about let's not have a witch hunt, let's not scapegoat too early till we actually know who is responsible.
The other big story of this week is going to be Rwanda. Obviously, we've had this tragic news of four people having been killed trying to cross the channel in the early hours of this morning, Nigel. We've got a joint opinion piece written by Danny Kruger, John Hayes and Mark Francois saying why the bill fails to give ministers the powers needed to stop the boats. On the other side of the argument, we've got the One Nation group saying that they won't continue to vote for it if it is amended, if it is toughened up. So Rishi Sunak's got a headache on his hands this week, hasn't he?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's an absolute nightmare. I mean, all it takes is 30 MPs from 30 Tory MPs, and this bill will fall. Now, we've got the capos of 3 of the 5 families who are writing...
There are these mafia references. We asked Mark Francois this before Christmas, whether he was some kind of mafia don. Seemed to be enjoying that label.
He seems to be enjoying the whole thing when you see him walking around the House of Commons at the moment. What they're saying is the bill needs to be tightened up. They're saying that these Rule 39 pyjama injunctions that stop the flights at the last minute, that needs to be dealt with. I mean, Rishi Sunak says he would ignore one of those. They want something a bit harder than that. Also, they want to try and stop individual appeals. Now, all of this, then, we nudge closer and closer to breaking international law. The One Nation group, which is a much bigger group, more than 100 MPs in the Tory party, are saying, no, we don't want that. This bill goes as far as it can possibly go. We'll vote for it, provided it's not amended. My guess is next week that the Tories will think, do we really want to bring down our government at the moment? Because a vote of no confidence would certainly follow if the bill disappeared, and probably the bill will go through as stands.
I mean, it's difficult for some Tories who might be facing electoral wipeout. There's been some polling conducted over the weekend which says that 9 in 10 constituents are concerned about immigration, not just illegal but also legal. The headline in the Mail's quite stark: Rishi's Rwanda plan will be ripped to pieces. Interestingly, Glenn Owen of the Mail on Sunday, he went out to Ukraine with Rishi Sunak over the weekend, and he got an interview with the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister is basically saying, no, the bill does what it does say. It does what it says on the tin. It's going to be OK. It's going to stop these legal challenges. Do you believe him, Nigel?
Well, we'll have to see. I mean, personally, I think Rwanda's a complete gimmick, and certainly should never have been introduced in the first place.
But it should act as a deterrent, not least with news of these 4 deaths in the Channel.
Well, I don't think that's the point. There is no evidence at all it will act as a deterrent. I mean, the senior official at the Home Office wouldn't even sign it off as value for money because there was no evidence that it would have a deterrent value. But we've come further than that. I mean, the issue now is whether or not, as constructed by Rishi Sunak, this bill gets through.
I think we're going to witness a resurgence of Suella Braverman and Robert Jenrick in the week, so we'll stay tuned.
We're going to hear lots of them this coming week, I would imagine.
Indeed so. And let's just finally have a look at some of the royal revelations that are in the Mail on Sunday. So Robert Hardman, who, funnily enough, is coming on my show next week to discuss this book. And it's a great book. I mean, sometimes we have royal books, they don't come up with much, they're a cut's job, we've heard it all before. What Robert Hardman done is pieced together the final days and hours of the Queen's life, and he speaks to the fact that it was discussed at one point, the idea of perhaps appointing Prince Charles, as he was then known, as a Prince Regent, should the Queen's health become so failing that she wasn't able to reign. This presumably is a reflection, Nigel, of the fact that the late Queen, would never have abdicated. Abdication was a dirty word in her vocabulary, following the behaviour of Edward VIII, who I think she blamed for her own father, George VI's premature death. But it's quite an interesting insight, that, isn't it?
It is. It would have been the first time that we'd had a regent since 1820, when George III, I think the modern term would be, had some mental mental issues, and his son took over as regent. By the sound of Robert Hardman's book, that Prince Charles at the time was not terribly keen on the role. He wanted to see the Queen go all the way through.
Indeed, so I'll be looking forward to speaking to Robert Hardman next week, and I've very much enjoyed speaking to you this morning, Nigel. Thank you very much for your time. Well, don't go anywhere, because we're going to be joined by Defence Manager James Cartledge after this weather bulletin.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry, here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. It is going to be quite a blustery, windy day for the vast majority of us. Some very tightly spaced isobars across much of the UK, providing gale-strength winds in places. It's also going to be a very wet day for western areas of Scotland, with this trailing weather system that is essentially stalled across this region and will provide heavy and persistent rainfall to the Highlands, Isle of Skye, Argyll and Bute. Do take care, an amber weather warning is in force. Significant disruption is possible from flooding and even landslides. Elsewhere, it will be a drier day. The cloud wants to break its way up into the afternoon, particularly to the northeast of higher ground, so the best of sunnier breaks through central eastern England, parts of northeast Scotland as well, where we'll see temperatures climb to highs of 13 degrees Celsius. The rain will eventually ease its way off for western Scotland as we head into the overnight period, but it's going to push its way southwards as a result, spreading across Northern Ireland, northwest England, into the far north of Wales as well. Far southeast, holding on to a drier night, still a mild one here, lows of 9 degrees Celsius, but some drier and clearer spells pushing their way into northwest Scotland as we start off Monday, so generally a better day here. Elsewhere though, Monday looks to be rather drab, dreary and damp, with outbreaks of rain and drizzle. Quite murky in places, hill fog across Eryri, the Pennines, the Cheviot. Still blustery across areas of England and Wales, but the wind's easing out for Northern Ireland, central areas of Scotland. Further rain is on the cards as we head towards Tuesday and Wednesday as well, so keep up to date with the forecast. Bye-bye.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Lovely to have your company this morning. Nigel Nelson's remaining with me while we wait for James Cartledge, the Defence Minister, to be ready. They're in a difficult situation, aren't they, at the Ministry of Defence, because the criticism from Labour, of all people, is that we are under-defended. I mean, I do find this positioning quite intriguing from Shadow Defence Secretary John Healey. He said because Britain's aircraft carriers are not ready to be sent to the Red Sea because of a recruitment crisis effectively engulfing all the armed forces, but particularly the Royal Navy, John Healey has said that the Conservative government has hollowed out the armed forces. Quotes, our Navy support ships are spending less time at sea and ministers have failed to get to grips with the growing recruitment crisis. Obviously, I'm going to put this to the minister, but what's your reaction to that? Because the Labour Party aren't historically associated with putting more money into our defences, are they?
Well, this is a different Labour Party from the one
from
the one we've had before.
Not according to Jeremy Corbyn and those supporting the Hutu rebels.
Certainly not according to Jeremy Corbyn, but I think it would be according to Keir Starmer. And so there is a commitment to maintain our 2.5% contribution to defence. I think Labour would actually do that. Absolutely right, that we haven't got enough sailors. The recruitment crisis is quite serious. When these actions happen, we have to go on the coattails of the Americans. And if you look at that first strike, the Americans hit a total of 60 targets, we hit 2, and only sent 4 planes. That's probably about what we can manage. So,
but isn't that quite embarrassing?
Well, I mean, I think we're giving them moral support. Bear in mind, we were the only other country that actually went into action with the Americans.
Yeah, we've got the French and the Germans and the Italians sort of sitting on the fence on this.
A bit, yeah. I mean, they're supporting it, but they're not actually sending any hardware into the region to go and do something. I think, in fairness, that we actually did something. We sent the Air Force into combat. We were supporting the Americans, all part of the special relationship that we talk about rather more than America does. But when the Americans go to war, we are there, and I think that shows that we remain their strongest ally.
How worried are you, Nigel, about sort of retaliatory attacks from, Iran, from others who have not got our best interest to heart? I think people watching and listening to this programme will be worried about the threat of terrorism resurging on the streets of London and elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, that obviously there is a greater risk from this. My own view is that Iran doesn't want to get involved if they possibly can. They'll use their proxies, the Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, to do their dirty work for them. So I don't think Iran wants to see the war spread, knowing that if it did, the Americans would hit them the same way that they hit Iraq. But, of course, there's always a danger. We know that the opposition TV channel Iran International had to leave London because the police here couldn't guarantee the safety of journalists on the basis that Iran's Revolutionary Guard were after them. So yes, there is a danger. I think that one shouldn't overplay it. It is a small danger at the moment, but again, as we know from all wars, they can escalate.
And there's an irony here, isn't there? Because we've, in this period in Iran where the resistant movement is actually gaining some momentum, we've seen women particularly going and challenging the Ayatollah, challenging the system that's been in place there that sees young women whipped or even killed for removing hijabs. So on one hand, in Iran, we've got a different set of circumstances where the people are really trying to rise up against what they see as a sort of return to a degree of medievalism. Yet at the same time, on the streets of London and elsewhere, we're seeing people supporting Houthi rebels who are propped up by this medieval and barbaric regime. It doesn't make any sense, Nigel.
Well, I would tend to agree with you. I wouldn't be out there protesting for the Houthis or for Iran. Iran remains a dangerous country. It wants to see the end of Israel, just as the Houthis do. So no, they're not people you'd really want to support. But at the moment, let's keep our fingers crossed that Iran just stays out of it as a state actor, even if they support Hezbollah, Hamas and the Houthis.
What do you make of the politics of Lord Cameron being front and centre, seemingly, of these strikes, and he's the one who's writing the op-ed for the Sunday Telegraph this morning. We've not heard much from Grant Shapps. This was always going to be the danger, wasn't it, of bringing in a former Prime Minister into Cabinet, not only threatening to overshadow Rishi Sunak on some of these issues, but also the Defence Secretary.
Yeah, I mean, I rather like the way he introduces his op-ed today in the Telegraph, where he says that he didn't think he'd be watching another Prime Minister sending our forces into action.
Thank you very much for that, Nigel. Now, James Cartledge, I believe, is with us now. He's the Minister of State for Defence Procurement. He's also the MP for South Suffolk. Mr Cartledge, hopefully you can hear me now. I had put this question to my guest, Nigel Nelson, earlier. We've had John Healey, your Labour counterpart, so to speak, talking about the fact that our armed forces have been hollowed out. The fact that we can't deploy HMS Queen Elizabeth to the Red Sea does suggest that our defences are woefully underfunded, under-resourced. We're not in a great position, are we, to be involving ourselves in these affairs in the Middle East?
Well, thanks, Camilla. It's a pleasure to be on your programme. And just to be absolutely clear, there is no truth whatsoever in the suggestion that we cannot deploy the carrier. I'm pleased to confirm both our carriers are in Portsmouth, they are at readiness, and they are available to be deployed if needed, if the operational decision is that that is the appropriate response. Just to highlight, because I appreciate there has been some coverage at this point, Queen Elizabeth, one of the carriers, returned only 8 weeks ago from a 13,000 nautical mile mission to the North Sea and the Baltic Sea. It's not true that we couldn't deploy them. I think what it is focused on is the fact that one of the support ships is about to go into an upgrade. That's very common. It's in Liverpool, maintenance of the ship, but we have other support ships available.
OK. Do you envisage that there will be more strikes that the UK will support in the near future?
I think the key point is this: we have to get the correct characterisation of the military effort undertaken so far, which was a very specific, targeted strike, proportionate, justified under international law. Of course, we don't rule out further action if it was justified.
And what is going to be the impact on the British people? I speak, of course, in terms of prices going up. We know how strategic and important that shipping lane is to the Western world. 12% of global trade passes through that area. Inevitably, are we going to be seeing prices go up again? Is this going to hamper Rishi Sunak's target for keeping inflation down? What's the impact, and what the government going to do to help people in the UK?
Well, it's a very good question. As you know, we made huge progress on the plan to cut inflation. We halved it by the end of the year, as the Prime Minister promised. So obviously we don't want to see that being reversed. That's why it's so important that we've undertaken the military action that we have. The Houthis were attacking international shipping from many countries. They've been doing so since November, wholly unjustified, indiscriminate attacks which put lives at risk, let alone the economic consequences. And of course, ultimately, they attacked a British naval vessel, HMS Diamond, which put us in the position where the Prime Minister concluded that he had no choice but to act in the manner that he did.
Were you disappointed that our European partners, France, Germany and Italy, didn't join this action? They're meant to be in coalition with us, but they've sat on their hands, haven't they?
I think that those countries have issued condemnation of the attacks on shipping in the Red Sea. And of course, many countries' ships were affected. But we had support from Bahrain, from Canada, Australia, the Netherlands, and Germany. And I think that there is a wide consensus that we cannot allow this to go on. But of course, it was a British naval ship that was attacked, as American vessels were. And so we as partners decided, under self-defense, which is a right under the UN Charter, Article 51, therefore, it was necessary to take these strikes. They were very proportionate, targeted, an act of self-defense. And now the key is we continue to patrol in the Red Sea under Operation Prosperity Guardian, and very much keeping a watching eye with our allies on what happens next.
Let's just return to domestic matters, Mr Cartledge. You probably have seen the headlines this morning talking about Rishi Sunak's Rwanda bill threatened to be torn to pieces by MPs. You've got some on one side of your party, the likes of Mark Francois and Danny Kruger and others, threatening that they will not vote for this bill unless it is strengthened, unless key amendments are added to it. And then you've got the One Nation group saying that they won't vote for it if it is amended. So the Prime Minister's stuck between a rock and a hard place. Meanwhile, Robert Jenrick and Suella Braverman, who were involved in the drafting of the legislation, say it isn't strong enough, it's not going to stop the boats. So it's a disaster, isn't it?
Well, of course, it's a hugely important issue where we've made enormous progress. As you know, small boat crossings down a third last year, when in many European countries you've seen sort of asylum numbers surging. I think in Europe, 80% increase. The point is, before second reading, which was before Christmas, we heard this sort of talk about the situation in Parliament, and of course it passed very comfortably. That's not to say we won't be engaging as a government with backbenchers from, with a wide range of views. I think that's absolutely right. But the key message is this. This is a very robust piece of legislation. It will enable us to create a deterrent so that we actually get people on the planes to Rwanda. We think that will send a very strong message, because we've seen only today the terrible, tragic consequences of this horrific trade in human beings. And it's why we have to get this legislation through, and why I'm bound to say that where we have a clear plan to deal with small boats, our opponents have no plan and will take us back to square one and have opposed all these measures. So yes, it's going to be a busy week in Parliament.
It will be a busy week in Parliament. James Cartledge, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. Well, lots more to come on today's show. Labour's Wes Streeting will be with me in just a minute. Don't go anywhere. I'll be back very soon.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. So much more to come in the next hour. I'll be interviewing the Mayor of the West Midlands, Andy Street, Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting and Israeli government spokesperson Elon Levy. All that after the news with Aaron Armstrong.
Hi there, it is 10 o'clock. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. At least 4 migrants have died trying to cross the English Channel overnight. A small boat carrying dozens of people got into difficulties just off a French beach north of the port of Boulogne. A huge rescue effort took place with French maritime vessels, a helicopter and emergency services combing the beach area at Wimereux. A further 2 migrant boats arrived safely in UK waters early this morning. At least 100 people have been taken to Dover. The Foreign Secretaries warned the Houthis of further strikes in Yemen if attacks in the Red Sea continue. Lord Cameron says the UK has sent an unambiguous message, but will continue to back words with action. Writing in The Telegraph, he says disruption in the Red Sea threatens vital supply chains, which could force up prices in Britain. President Joe Biden has issued a similar warning to Iran, which backs the militant group. Thousands of people are gathering in central London for a rally which will mark the 100-day anniversary since the October 7th attack on Israel. Cross-party supports also expected to attend the event in central London in a show of solidarity. Over 100 hostages are still being held by the terrorist group Hamas. It's after thousands of pro-Palestinian protesters took to major cities yesterday calling for a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. The Hamas-run health ministry says almost 24,000 Palestinians have been killed by Israel in Gaza. Now, a record 420,000 patients had to wait more than 12 hours in A&E last year. The latest NHS England figures show 1 in 15 patients faced so-called trolley waits, which have been linked to excess deaths and increased harm to patients. They also reflect a 20% increase on 2022. The Lib Dem leader, Sir Ed Davies, accusing the Prime Minister of driving the health service into the ground. It's likely to snow in parts of Scotland today, with freezing temperatures expected further south this week. A yellow weather warning for snow and ice is in place until tomorrow, covering areas including the Highlands, the Orkney and Shetland Islands as well. Between 5 and 10 centimetres of snow is expected in parts of Scotland, therefore causing disruption on the roads and railways. The cold snap expected to affect the south of the country later in the week. This is GB News. We're live across the UK on TV, on digital radio and on your smart speaker too. Now, it's back to Camilla.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Still lots more to come. In just a minute, I'm going to be joined by the Mayor of the West Midlands, Andy Street. Wes Streeting, Shadow Health Secretary, is going to be joining me too. And I'm going to be speaking to Elon Levy, the Israel government spokesman. And Liam Byrne, the Labour MP and Chair of the Business Select Committee, is going to be joining me to discuss his new book. But first of all, let's speak to Andy Street now, Conservative Mayor of the West Midlands, former boss of John Lewis, of course. Andy, lovely to see you this morning. Thank you very much for joining me. Can we get started on the post office, because you have got a unique perspective on this, having been the head of a major company and at the same time a politician now and obviously Mayor of West Midlands. Now, you got a CBE, I remember, some time ago for your service to business and other matters. Some people are looking at Paula Vanel's, and she's given the CBE back, and they're saying to themselves, should CEOs actually get CBEs, already very well rewarded? Obviously, there's been a scandal in her case. Do you think that she was rewarded effectively for failure? And is it right at all that people who are very well remunerated get these honours in the first place?
Yeah. So good morning, Camilla. Lovely to be here. There's a lot in that question. But you're right. It's interesting to view the Post Office scandal through the lens of having led John Lewis for 10 years. And yes, I think you do understand in that CEO role the whole point about trust. And there's clearly been an incredible breach of trust here. And people must be held to account for that. But to come to the CBE question and the honours system, my personal view is that honours are incredibly good for people who do normal jobs and then do something extraordinary for society and actually get rewarded. I was with a chap who runs a series of community centres in Birmingham just this week, and he'd just been to Westminster, to Windsor, to get his award, and he felt so made up. So let's not trash the system overall. But to your point about people doing their well-paid senior job and just doing their job, I don't believe that they should equally be rewarded for that, because frankly they're remunerated for it appropriately. So that's the difference, I think.
So did you feel that you got your honour for doing more than just your job?
Well, it was very clear, because I actually chaired the local enterprise partnership for Birmingham and Solihull, and in the citation, that's what was called out, actually. It wasn't just for doing the John Lewis job.
So, in contrast, Venel's was given this award for services to the Post Office.
It looks that way, and whether you be, frankly, a perm secretary of a department, a CEO of a company, if you are paid really well for doing an important job, not taking anything away from that, I don't believe that you need an honour as well. You're remunerated, that covers it.
Yeah, there's been talk about her perhaps losing the golden handshake that she received. She got £3 million when she left. Do you think that's too complicated to start clawing back money, or do you actually think maybe that is an approach that the government should take?
Well, I think there's a danger of prejudging here. You know, it's very clear that she did not exercise control of her organisation. That's right, because you must, as CEO, you must know what's going on in your organisation. I'm pretty sure that if we'd had, when I was in John Lewis, if we'd had 58 successful appeals against us in a court of law, I would have known about it as the boss. So I assume they knew about it, so you have to assume they didn't choose to act upon it. But we would be wrong to prejudge that and take cash away. There needs to be a proper inquiry as to what's gone on here, and then, of course, action must follow. But let's not prejudge.
And what's your business-minded sort of intuition on Fujitsu? Because, again, there's been the suggestion that they knew that there were bugs in this system, and on it went, and then, of course, they went on to be rewarded billions in further government contracts.
Yeah. So it's really the same answer as the Post Office. Part of leadership in business is you know you're in a really responsible position. People are relying on you. That notion of trust, we're obsessed with that in John Lewis. And if as CEO of an IT supplier, you know it is doing wrong, you have a moral responsibility to turn around and do something about it. So exactly the same. But I'm quite careful not to sort of slam all business. You know, it'd be very easy, just as in 2008, to say business is bad. I'm also a huge believer that good business is an incredible force for good in the country. And we've just got to be careful about that judgment in this.
Let's talk about Birmingham then. What on earth has gone on with Birmingham Council, now declared bankrupt? The Labour-run council is saying that people's council tax bills will have to go up by, I think, 10% to compensate. What's happened?
So it's 10% this year, it's 10% next year, so they've announced 20% cumulatively. And, you know, whatever's happened with the politics, you have to think, first of all, about hard-pressed council taxpayers across the city. I was on doorsteps in Northfield only yesterday morning, and this is hurting people on the ground, so let's remember that. But what's happened, it's really very straightforward. It's that they have, both on underlying budget and also some one-off issues, got this equal pay claim that has come since 2017, £750 million. It's an enormous amount of money in equal pay claims that they face. So they simply cannot balance their budget, hence the declaring effective bankruptcy. And then, of course, they have to get back into financial security, and that's why council tax is going up directly as a result of this.
I mean, presumably you support the idea of women being paid equally to men, but this has been mismanaged, has it?
Of course. I mean, every organisation in the country, not just local authorities, that's sort of enshrined, isn't it? So that, and the sort of depressing thing about Birmingham, we could use the word the scandalous thing actually, is that there was an equal pay claim before that was settled in 2014, effectively settled by the then leader of the council swiftly, and then a new claim has come since 2017. And it's utterly depressing that, you know, the same thing has happened twice and citizens in Birmingham are left paying the bill.
I mean, obviously the council would push back on what you're saying and say that actually it hasn't mismanaged funds and that it's doing its best by its constituents, so to speak. But let's talk about something different involving your role in Birmingham and the idea that you have had huge success with housing and meeting housing targets. Now, tell us, Andy, how have you managed to do this? Because the Conservative government has been criticised for not building enough houses. That's been a criticism also made by the way of the previous coalition and indeed Labour administrations. But what are you doing right that you can tell Rishi Sunak to do in order to build more housing?
So first thing, it's not just about me and it's not just about Birmingham. This is a West Midlands region number, actually. And the reason you asked the question, just so viewers understand this, is we are the only region in the country which is achieving its housing target. How? Yeah. So three things I'd call out. First of all our local authorities working together in this sort of technical duty to cooperate, to have a target number and then have a plan to actually achieve them. Very pro-growth policies with developers who come forward, so our councils naturally are inclined to support them. And then critically, our role is to find funding, public funding, to close the viability gap in private schemes that wouldn't otherwise be viable, particularly in brownfield remediation. So the thing that I'm so pleased about is we're achieving our numbers, an average of about 16,000 homes per year in the last 6 years, whilst protecting all of our green belts. So we're bringing old industrial disused place back into use for housing. And it's all those things together that give us that great position.
Do you think there's too much NIMBYism, not in my backyardism, in the Tory party? Because this is a huge electoral issue, isn't it? There are people now who are saying we need more housing. They might have previously been opposed, but now they're looking at their children and their grandchildren, even their great-grandchildren. They can't afford to live nearby. So housing is the key. You'll have people like Simon Clarke singing from this hymn sheet, yet at the same time there are other Tories like Theresa Villiers and others who seem to want to block housing.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's really important to my party and its offer to people coming up. I'm very much in the Simon Clarke view of this, that actually we have to find a way that we build those homes, including affordable homes. I'm very pleased that our percentage of affordable is going up. And one thing I would definitely not have done is remove the target of that we have for each area, because that definitely has driven this collaborative behaviour across the West Midlands. So I want that target, and I want actually my party to demonstrate that it can deliver on the ground. Just one thing though, because the journalists make this very easy for the Labour Party. If you actually look at what has been produced in the last year, centrally across the whole country, it's nearly double what was done in the last year of the last Labour government. So let's just not take too many lessons on that.
Andy, I don't like to make life easy for either Tory or Labour politicians, I can assure you. Can we talk about HS2 briefly? You did threaten to resign if that Birmingham to Manchester leg was scrapped. It was scrapped. Why didn't you resign?
So let's be very clear about this. People suggested I should resign. I never threatened the Prime Minister.
But you weren't happy about it.
I wasn't happy. I wasn't happy, and no beating about Bush I did consider it. Why didn't I resign? Because there are many other issues to fight for, particularly, you know, the party's bigger than one simple thing. But probably important to just tell you what's gone on since. So since the Prime Minister actually he made his speech, and he said in that speech, I will welcome proposals from Andy Street for improved connectivity between Birmingham and Manchester, as he said. And the good news is, working with Andy Burnham, we have now commissioned the private sector to come up with those proposals, and government is really very welcoming of that work at the moment. So we have not given up the idea of much improved connectivity between the West Midlands and Greater Manchester.
Very briefly, Andy, I mean, HS2 is a project now. We read in the week that actually the trains are going to be slower and not be able to take as many people as they thought. They're not going to come all the way into Euston. This whole rail project's a disaster, isn't it?
That last bit about Euston isn't right, actually.
Well,
the work is still...
It's not going to be happening in Euston for another 7 years.
That's correct. But
I mean, what's the point of it?
It is going to go to Euston, and it is going to go all the way to It isn't opening to Birmingham until about 7 years' time, actually.
This is a bit of a white elephant, this project,
not
isn't
true.
it? That's cost millions and billions and actually isn't delivering on its original pledge.
So let's be clear. It is overspent. The execution of HS2 has not been good. I am not here to defend HS2 Limited and the fact they are significantly over budget. But the principle of a new connectivity between London, Birmingham and the north, that has to be held on to, and it will open within about 7 years. 2 Curzon Street gives us an incredible opportunity.
You're a patient man, Andy Street. 7 years' time. All right, fair enough. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. Lovely to see you.
Thank you.
Well, lots more still to come on the show. Don't go anywhere, because after the break, I'm going to be speaking to Wes Streeting, the Shadow Health Secretary. Back in just a jiffy.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Carson, this Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Delighted to be joined in the studio by Wes Streeting, Shadow Health Secretary and Labour MP for Ilford North. Wes, if I may call you that. How are you?
You've
been called Wes. Lovely to see you.
Very nice.
It's slick, isn't it? First day here.
Absolutely.
Very good to see you in studio and in the flesh rather than down the line, so to speak. Right, let's talk about this strike on the Houthis, because I'm intrigued by the division in the Labour Party over this issue. We've had your Labour colleague, Asbana Begum, labelling the strikes by Britain and America as dangerously provocative. I mean, is she familiar with who the Houthis are and what they're capable of? There are still some fruitcakes in the Labour Party, aren't there?
Well, the provocation is obviously on the part of the Houthis. They are the ones that chose to attack commercial shipping.
and perhaps even more seriously chose to attack HMS Diamond, one of our own vessels carrying serving personnel who are there to protect Britain, keep us out of harm's way. And I think the action the government's taken is the right action. It's the same action Keir Starmer would have taken if he were in number 10. And Keir Starmer's been clear about that. And I think, by the way, Keir Starmer, being no doubt, is speaking on behalf of the vast majority of the Labour Party. There are one or two colleagues who've criticised, but,
should she lose
Keir
the
Starmer
whip?
speaks for the Labour Party.
It's not particularly befitting, is it, of an elective representative to in some way seem to be supporting the Houthis against the British in this? Shouldn't Begum lose the whip?
Well, it's the decision for Keir Starmer and the chief whip. Well, I just think, we're a democracy. We're going to disagree from time to time. The important thing is that the vast majority of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer, John Healey, our Shadow Defence Secretary, are absolutely clear, having been briefed on the government on the nature of the threat, as well as the information that I think is in the public domain, which I'm surprised by those comments. It's the Houthis that have been provocative. They have attacked not just British personnel and a British ship, but they've attacked British interests. And we should be in no doubt whatsoever, particularly against the economic backdrop this country faces, that their actions in the Red Sea are threatening the world economy, as well as threatening...
Although Starmer had previously said that he wouldn't ever support military action unless there was a parliamentary vote. So how does he square that circle?
Well, to be fair to Kieran, he was interviewed this morning. Keir's been, I think, very clear about the fact that you would want to have a vote in Parliament before military action takes place, particularly when it comes to the deployment of troops. There will always be circumstances in which government has to act quickly and decisively and without reference to Parliament. And that's why Keir Starmer would have made exactly the same decision in these circumstances. The government did, to be fair to them, brief the opposition before action took place, as well as the Speaker of the House of Commons, and the Prime Minister's coming to the House of Commons on Monday. So while we criticise the Prime Minister for many aspects of his domestic record,
not this one.
No, we're not. And look, we don't go out of our way to disagree with the government for the sake of it, especially when it comes to foreign policy. You want to try and speak with one voice as the country.
Is Keir Starmer a hypocrite, though? I ask you this because I was intrigued by the story that we covered in the week on The Telegraph, that Starmer had taken a Qatari-funded private jet to COP28. It's in his latest declaration of financial interests. It shows the trip for him and 3 staffers cost £25,000. Hang on a minute, wasn't this the same Keir Starmer who said he wouldn't travel out to Qatar for the World Cup because of the human rights record?
Well, I'd say draw 2 distinctions. One is this meeting with the Emir of Qatar was about the crisis in Gaza and the crucial role that Qatar is playing in terms of hostage release and trying to see a diplomatic exit point from this terrible war, as well as other areas of shared mutual interests. And it's right that we engage with world leaders, and there was an opportunity for Keir to do that around the COP.
Should he have taken the 25 grand funded private jet there, though? We know his views on environmental issues, let alone his views on Qatar's human rights record.
Yeah, well, taking private jets should never be the norm, particularly domestic flights, which the Prime Minister's been busy doing. There was an opportunity that arose for Keir to meet the Emir of Qatar.
Though, doesn't it?
Hang on a second. In terms of being able to meet the Emir of Qatar on the timings that were available and to seize that opportunity while Keir was in Dubai, he took that opportunity because, if Keir is the Prime Minister of the country after the next general election, we want to be able to work and influence with partners around the world, with other countries around the world, in Britain's national self-interest, but also in terms of sort of collective global interests as well. And Qatar is playing a critical role at the moment in the Middle East.
I mean, I appreciate they have played a critical role in the release of hostages. They've also got links to Hamas, housing Hamas's leader in Qatar. I mean, it could be a case of keep your friends close and your enemies closer. However, this does show poor judgment, doesn't it?
No, I think it's even more important to engage. And whether people are our allies or our adversaries or somewhere in between, having a Britain that is engaged on the global stage, trying to use our influence and leverage to both in terms of our own national self-interest, but also in terms of the values that Britain upholds on the international stage, it is important to engage.
OK, I mean, some people might think a 25 grand private jet trip isn't exactly man of the people, but let's move on. Let's talk about the Green Prosperity Plan, that £28 billion. Is it an ambition or a target? I'm getting confused because it was a target and now it's been watered down into an ambition.
Well, the target is for clean power by 2030, and what Labour has been setting out on energy policy, I think, is an approach that delivers all sorts of benefits. Lower bills for the consumer, which is really important in the cost of living crisis. More jobs, particularly in areas of our country that have suffered massive deindustrialisation over decades with the loss of older industries. This is the opportunity to put that right.
Okay.
To give Britain its energy security back when it's, you know, we don't want to be prone to the whims of tyrants and dictators around the world when it comes to our energy supply.
Yes.
What we have said, and what has continued to be difficult for us in the last couple of years since that commitment was initially made, is the state of the economy and public finances. And we're absolutely clear, Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves, the entire shadow cabinet, the fiscal rules and sound management of the public finances comes first.
But are you going to replace those 32 gas-fired plants, or are you going to retrofit them? And if you are, how much is that going to cost? And can you do it in the next 7 years?
Well, we'll spell that out in our manifesto at the general election, which will be fully costed and fully funded. We want to get to clean power by 2030. We want to do so in a way that brings real benefits to consumers, not hikes up the costs, because I think that's where the sweet spot of green transition is, that there is unquestionably a cost to us in the longer term of failing to act. But I think in the short to medium term, we can deliver those benefits for consumers of lower bills, more and better paid jobs, and giving Britain our energy security back.
Quick question on toothbrushing before we get on to what you want to talk about today, which is mental health, particularly among men. Toothbrushing and children having to be taught toothbrushing in primary schools. At what point do you turn around and say this is also the result of bad parenting?
Well, it is, unquestionably. I mean, I'd say that from the outset.
James Daly was very criticised for talking about, I won't use the word on a Sunday morning, but bad parenting. He was criticised. The left rounded on him and said, how dare you stigmatise parents? But actually, there are some parents here that are bad. Why don't you teach the parents how to teach the children to brush their teeth, rather than lumbering teachers with the job?
Well, there's no doubt that health visitors can and do play a great role. There aren't enough of them. We've got a commitment to train up 5,000 more health visitors as part of Labour's workforce plan for the NHS. So that early intervention can make a difference. But look, if it's up to me, kids would turn up to school with these skills already.
So you think some parents are bad? What do we do about it?
Well, I think one thing you can't do is just say to the kids, I'm really sorry your parents haven't bothered to teach you to brush your teeth. You're going to have your teeth pulled out in A&E or you know, so we are acting. It's proven to work. As with so many of the health policies we're setting out, we're taking things that are tried and tested and thinking, OK, well, how do we scale that up and roll it out? Because let me tell you, the NHS has got more pilots than the RAF. What they're not so good at is adopting good practice and rolling it out everywhere.
How do we adopt better good practice when it comes to mental health? I know you're really concerned about the suicide rate, particularly amongst men and young men.
Yeah. It's the biggest killer. It's the biggest killer
What shall we do?
of young
Because
men.
lots of people say that care in the community hasn't worked.
Well, I think a few things. One is we've got a commitment to have dedicated mental health support in every primary and secondary school in the country.
Can you start
community mental health hubs in every community, and 8,500 extra mental health workers who will be specifically trained on self-harm, which is also a big issue. It's a fully costed, fully funded policy.
How much will it cost?
£750 million, which, alongside the wider investment we've earmarked for the NHS, fully costed, fully funded, in this case by abolishing the tax breaks enjoyed by private schools and private equity, because we think that would be a fairer way of
Quick question on private schools, because your colleague Bridget Phillipson wasn't able to answer this, as brief as you can be. What are you going to do with those children who probably, if you get into power in the autumn, may have left their schools already because their parents can't afford them, or indeed little schools have closed down because people can't afford the fees? You're going to have thousands of new children in the state system. How are you going to accommodate them on day one? Brief answer.
Well, let's look at the increase in private school fees over more than a decade.
Physically accommodate them?
I'm not buying these hang on a minute. I'm not buying these crocodile tears from private schools. They hike their fees up year after year after year.
The Schools councillors talked about there being 40,000 kids in the system if this happens.
Well, they would say that, wouldn't they?
Well, say if it's 5,000, what will you do with
hang on a minute, because I think this needs to be called out. They hike up their fees year after year. We don't see drops in numbers.
If you can't answer, I just assume you don't know.
Don't take Michael Gove who is not a man I normally agree with, gave the best argument I've seen on this in the times when he was, funny enough, when he wasn't in government. And he said, why should we subsidise the education of oligarchs rather than put the money into our state schools, into our kids
and we don't know what's going to happen to them in limbo.
No, don't buy the crocodiles' tears of the private schools. Don't be so gullible.
Thank you very much, Wes Streeting, for coming in this morning. Michael Portillo joins me now, former Defence Secretary, GB News presenter. He's on from 11 a.m. I just wanted to get your quick reaction, Michael, to the airstrikes on the Houthi rebels. Do you think there'll be more strikes, and was this a good idea for the UK to support the US in this endeavour?
Well, a good idea is a funny way of putting it. I mean, I've read very carefully what the Foreign Secretary has written in the newspaper today, and I agree with his argument for why it was necessary. But I approach this in a very sombre way. I think we're at a very dangerous moment. And the dangerous moment is that there could be an escalation in the theatre of war, that is to say, in the Middle East, or there could be reprisals taken against us here at home. So these decisions are not taken lightly. And I'm struck by the way that David Cameron, in his newspaper article this morning, goes through the way in which members of the Cabinet were consulted, all the departments brought on board. I thought it was very interesting in your interview just now to have confirmation that the opposition was also briefed. So I don't think there should be any tone of gung-ho-ness about this. I think there will be further strikes. I think they are the right thing to do, but I also think that we are at a very perilous moment.
Briefly, Michael, what have you got coming up on the show at 11?
I'm very interested in the post office situation. One of the things I'm very interested in is that despite all the journalism and despite all the parliamentary activity, what actually convinced the government that it could bring justice was a TV drama. Why was that so? I'm going to be investigating that question. I'm going to be talking to a Northern Ireland journalist who was sued for defamation by an IRA bomber, a man who put a bomb in the Old Bailey and served time. And the journalist was sued for defamation of character. The case was kicked out. But is Sinn Féin using defamation suits as a way of silencing criticism? And I'll be talking about a man called Mike Sadler, who's just died at the age of 103. Using the stars, he guided British forces across the desert in North Africa so that they could attack German air bases with enormous effect.
Sounds like another fascinating show. We'll stay tuned at 11 for that. Thank you very much, Michael Portillo. Now, don't lose a muscle, because after the break, I'm going to be interviewing the Israeli government spokesman, Elon Levy. After the break now. Back soon.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I. So you want higher taxes? Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Now, Eilon Levy joins me in the studio. He's the spokesman for the Israeli government. Lovely to see you in
Hello,
the flesh.
Camilla. Good to be here in the studio.
I know you've had a very, very busy 3 months. Let's talk about Lord Cameron and what he said about the conflict in the Middle East this week. Am I worried that Israel has taken action that might be in breach of international law because this particular premises has been bombed or whatever? Yes, of course. Is the Foreign Secretary in support of Israel? Are you worried about what he's saying about you breaching international law potentially?
The Foreign Secretary and the British government absolutely stand behind what they said immediately after the massacre when the Houses of Parliament and 10 Downing Street were lit up in the colours of the Israeli flag. And that is Britain wants Israel to win this war. And we saw just before those remarks by Lord Cameron, which were taken out of context by the press, he said, after consulting Foreign Office lawyers, he has no reasons to think there are violations of international law. And he was very clear in that very interesting column he wrote with the German Foreign Minister that Hamas must lay down its arms. There can be no future for Hamas in a post-war Gaza. And we know that the United Kingdom still stands shoulder to shoulder with us as we fight to bring back the hostages and bring to justice the terror regime that perpetrated those unspeakable atrocities 100 days ago.
Are you worried, though, that UK and US support is slightly wavering? I mean, these concerns about whether you have or haven't breached international law, I take your point about this perhaps being taken out of context. But there is this sense to which the Western world and the international community are keeping their eyes closely on Israel and Israel's behaviour, which wouldn't suggest that they have full support, that everything that Israel's doing. Is that fair to say?
I think Britain, the United States and the rest of the Western world understand that we are fighting for humanity on the front lines of humanity. They understand that after Hamas invaded Israel on October 7th, massacred 1,200 people, abducted 250 people, anything short of a total Israeli victory over Hamas would send a message to terrorists and violent extremists all around the world that you can massacre people and democratic societies have no right to fight back. And let's be clear, that is what the protests on the streets of London yesterday, the pro-Hamas march, is calling for. They are calling to save Hamas from the consequences of its actions. And we know that Britain stands shoulder to shoulder with us because as we see, even people on the streets of London yesterday calling for Houthi attacks against British ships, they understand that we're on the same side.
Some marchers will say we're not pro-Hamas, we're pro-Palestinians.
They would say
and
that.
they'll be worried about the growing death toll in the Gaza Strip.
Of course, but if they were truly concerned about Palestinian civilians, they would call for an end to the fighting that sees Hamas surrender.
Well, when will the fighting end? Is that when Gaza's destroyed or when every Hamas terrorist is killed? Or is it actually when the US and the UK and others say, OK, enough's enough?
We're in a fight for our lives now. There will be no end to the fighting that leaves the hostages in Gaza and Hamas still in power. Because the first thing that Hamas did after burning, beheading and raping so many people, abducting all those hostages, was to tell us that it wants to do it again and again, and one October 7th was not enough. We want to end this war. But we want to end this war in a way that makes sure Hamas cannot attack us again, because that is its reason for existing, in order to wage never-ending war and jihad against our people. And so if anyone thinks we're going to abandon the vulnerable hostages in the Hamas terror dungeons, they're sorely mistaken.
But how do you assess a sort of victory for Israel in this? Because it could be a case of numbers. We know that key targets, key Hamas leaders have already been taken out.
Well over 8,000 Hamas terrorists.
But how many need to be taken out for this to end?
Our goals in this war...
Every single one? And what does that look like in practice? And how long might that take, do you think?
Our goals in this war are to bring back all of the hostages. There will be no one left behind. We do not intend to abandon them there. And to destroy Hamas's governing and military infrastructure. And by the way, our fight against Hamas is very similar to the fight that Britain and 85 other nations had against ISIS a decade ago. They understood they can't defeat an idea. No one thought they were going to destroy Islamic extremism for all. But you can remove it from power. And Britain joined together with other nations to say ISIS cannot have territory from which to conduct attacks against the rest of the world. And our fight is very similar with one small difference. This isn't 1,000 miles away. This is literally our backyard. Some people's homes in Israel are only meters away from the Hamas terror regime that is telling us it wants to burn whole families again. And we need our people to be able to go home, to go to the homes that were burned to a cinder on October 7th, and to sleep safely in their beds. And for that to happen, the Hamas terror regime can no longer be their neighbour.
And what of those who accuse Israel of committing a genocide? You'll be familiar with the scenes at The Hague, South Africa, of all nations, bringing a claim of genocide against the Israelis. I was interested to see former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn pop up at that hearing. I don't know what your response was to the hearing, but also his presence at it.
Defending Israel at that case was the expert who literally wrote the textbook on international law, and on the other side was Jeremy Corbyn. Camilla, on October 7th, it was Hamas that perpetrated an act of genocide. It sent its death squads with a mission to burn, behead, rape, torture, mutilate, and abduct as many people as possible. And we are fighting to bring back the hostages and to bring Hamas to justice. And we think it is outrageous that South Africa has decided to act as the legal arm of Hamas. Because what South Africa is trying to do at The Hague is to give Hamas a stay of execution, to intervene, to save Hamas's skin and shield it from the consequences of the bloodiest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust.
South Africa will be saying that it's trying to stand up for the people of Gaza, not necessarily Hamas as a regime.
South Africa, on October 8th, blamed Israel for the massacre. South Africa is a country that has aligned itself diplomatically with Iran and Russia and Hamas. And we think it's tragic that a country that once had a reputation of so proudly fighting against racism is now fighting pro bono on the side of the biggest racist of all and trying to save Hamas from the consequences of that. And by the way, the UK has also said South Africa's case, we say it's absurd. The UK says completely unjustified and wrong.
But it could be two different things, couldn't it? You know, on one hand, you're saying that they are launching this campaign, this hearing against Israel. It could just be that they're launching it in support of the people of Gaza because there are legitimate concerns about the number of civilian casualties. They are legitimate, those concerns, aren't they?
There are definitely reasons to be fearful for the safety of civilians, but the answer to that is to demand the surrender of Hamas, to demand that the terror regime that perpetrated those atrocities lay down its arms, release the hostages and hand over its war criminals for a tribunal, not to leave them on their feet free to fight again when they are telling us they want to commit repeated acts of genocide. If you think you're standing up against genocide, you don't intervene to save the skin of the terror regime that is telling us 1 October 7th was not enough. It wants to commit more and more atrocities, and that is why we are committed to fight both Hamas and to fight these absurd proceedings that the United States has said are meritless and particularly galling because the people bringing those proceedings are those committed to further acts of genocide against our people.
I mean, we've talked about the strikes on the Houthis. How concerned are you about full-scale war breaking out with Iran? I mean, so far Iran seems to have been hiding behind some of its proxies, but at the same time you'll understand that people watching and listening to this show are very worried about Britain's involvement in the escalating situation in the Red Sea.
Yeah. And by the way, the escalation is a reminder of the importance of the UK-Israel alliance, because on the one hand, you have the rapists of Hamas and pirates of the Houthis who are allies. On the other side, the UK and Israel are allies, and it's clear that we are on the same side fighting for international peace and security. Now, we do not want to see an escalation. We have been warning since October 7th. We are going after the October 7th monsters. We don't want to see this escalating. Unfortunately, Hezbollah, the Iranian proxy in Lebanon, decided to join this war on the side of Hamas. It's fired over 2,000 rockets into Israel. It's led to 80,000 displaced Israelis who have not been in their homes for 3 months and can't go back to their homes because Hezbollah is shelling them. And we are warning them, enough is enough. Desist, back away from the border as UN Security Council resolutions require. Back off, or we will have to push you away. Because our people need to return to their homes in peace and security. We don't think it's very much to ask for. We want there to be a peaceful diplomatic resolution. But if that does not happen, we are prepared to fight to get our people home to safety.
Eilon Levy, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. Lots more to come, including an interview with Labour MP Liam Byrne. Remember him? He famously wrote that "there's no money left" note when he left government in 2010. Does he regret it now? But first, here's the weather.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry, here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. It is going to be quite a blustery, windy day for the vast majority of us. Some very tightly spaced isobars across much of the UK, providing gale-strength winds in places. It's also going to be a very wet day for western areas of Scotland, with this trailing weather system that is essentially stalled across this region and will provide heavy and persistent rainfall to the Highlands, Isle of Skye, Argyll and Bute. Do take care, an amber weather warning is in force. Significant disruption is possible from flooding and even landslides. Elsewhere, it will be a drier day. The cloud wants to break its way up into the afternoon, particularly to the northeast of higher ground, so the best of sunnier breaks through central eastern England, parts of northeast Scotland as well, where we'll see temperatures climb to highs of 13 degrees Celsius. The rain will eventually ease its way off for western Scotland as we head into the overnight period, but it's going to push its way southwards as a result, spreading across Northern Ireland, northwest England, into the far north of Wales as well. The far southeast holding on to a drier night, still a mild one here, lows of 9 degrees Celsius, but some drier and clearer spells pushing their way into northwest Scotland as we start off Monday, so generally a better day here. Elsewhere though, Monday looks to be rather drab, dreary and damp, with outbreaks of rain and drizzle. Quite murky in places, hill fog across Eryri, the Pennines, the Cheviot. Still blustery across areas of England and Wales, but the winds easing out for Northern Ireland, central areas of Scotland. Further rain is on the cards as we head towards Tuesday and Wednesday as well, so keep up to date with the forecast. Bye-bye.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Welcome back. Liam Byrne is with me now. He's the Labour MP for Birmingham Hodge Hill. He's also chair of the Business Select Committee. He's the former Chief Secretary of the Treasury, and he's written this book, The Inequality of Wealth, Why It Matters and How to Fix It. Available at all good bookshops, Liam. Lovely to see you. I'm going to get onto the note in just a moment, because you are famous for the note that you left when you were...
and these are the notes I wish I'd left.
Indeed. Well, let's talk about this book. Why write it? What's it all about?
So... it's true. I left a note at the Treasury. It's a traditional note, the traditional leaving note from one team to another to say things were a little bit tight.
What was the precise wording, please?
Well, I'm afraid there is no money.
Yes.
Now, of course, the national debt has doubled. Living standards have basically not moved for pretty much everybody in the country. But there is one group that's done pretty well. Actually, the top 1% in Britain, frankly, have never had it so good. We've got luxury car sales, private yacht sales, private jet sales at an all-time high.
Is there anything wrong with that, though? I mean, presumably they're employing lots of people and making lots of money and paying a lot of tax.
Yes, but the real issue is, what do you do about the other 99%? So if you believe in aspiration and opportunity, and if you believe in what I believe in, which is building a wealth-owning democracy, we've got to grapple with the fact that right now wealth is not being fairly shared. And it's Davos this week, and there are some figures that I'm putting out today that basically show if current trends continue, the top 1% will grow 91 times richer than everybody else over the next few years. So you've got some people doing...
But the top 1% does pay most of the tax, doesn't it?
It doesn't, actually. No, it doesn't.
I thought there was a statistic to say that the top 1% in this country paid about 28% of the tax.
If you look at the income tax, that may be true, but if you look at all taxes, VAT, national insurance, that kind of thing, actually, you've got a situation right now where the very luckiest in society may only pay 20% tax, when 1 in 5 people are paying 40% tax. Why is that? Because they're getting their money from investment income where tax is much lower. So the question we've got to confront as a country is, at a time when people can't afford a home of their own, or the education they need for the future, or a pension for their golden age, how do you make sure that everybody gets the chance to build the wealth that they should be able to build in a country like ours. We believe in social mobility in this country. We believe in something called the property-owning democracy. Right now, that's not a reality for most people in our country.
OK.
And we've got to fix it now. And the book's got some big ideas about how you do that.
And I'd like you to tell me a couple of them in just a moment. I mean, the Labour Party, perhaps even this book, could stand accused of sort of perpetrating the politics of envy. I mean, you talk about the absurdity of affluence in this book, and you point out that Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk have both been pursuing these slightly sort of self-aggrandising plans with space rockets and all the rest of it. I mean, first of all, it's up to them how they spend their vast wealth. They're both employing huge numbers of people. And second of all, when you talk about social mobility, I mean, you could argue what better way to elevate your child above your own status than to work very hard, pay for them to go to private school, let them flourish and perhaps be educated beyond your own education, have them go to university and prosper. And yet at the same time, Labour seems to be wanting to hold those parents back with this idea of slapping VAT on school fees.
Well, I'm not a big subscriber to the politics of envy. I do believe in the politics of empowerment. I was an entrepreneur, a tech entrepreneur who went from a failing comprehensive school in Essex to the Harvard Business School on a Fulbright scholarship and started a business before I came into politics. The first book I wrote actually was a book about the history of our country, told through the lives of 10 great entrepreneurs, and it makes a point. Entrepreneurs make history by inventing the future. But right now, we've got a lot of businesses in Britain that actually aren't creating value for people. They're just extracting wealth. And the problem that you've got when you get countries with high levels of inequality is those countries become corrupt, they become poor, and they become stagnant. And that's not a future that any of us want for Britain. We want a country, I think, where young people are able to get a home to call their own. We want a place where, you know, people can have a pension for their golden years. We want people to be able to train and retrain.
What's the magic bullet? I mean, there probably isn't one for this, but I mean, I think everybody watching and listening to this would agree that it would be great to be paid more. It would be great for housing to be more affordable, but the way that the economy is right now, I mean, house prices aren't going to come down anytime soon. You'll have others worried about that. We don't want a housing crash to make sure that people can afford to get up on the ladder. Exactly. Equally, I think people might be legitimately worried, particularly if Labour come into power, and we've seen what Sadiq Khan has just done for RMT workers, who some say are already well paid. I mean, train drivers earn more than half again, of the national living wage, is that if you give too many public sector workers pay rises, it's going to be inflationary and end up clobbering the rest of us.
So there's a couple of big things that we can do, and these are not novel, radical ideas. The ideas in the book are all ideas that have worked somewhere in the world. So we could get British pension funds actually investing in British business. Right now, that doesn't happen. Why don't we roll up our pension funds into something like Canada and Australia and invest in British business for the long term? That's how you create good businesses for the long term that have got the money to pay well. We should make sure that young people have got a deposit for a home. Only 4% of young people who don't own their home have both the deposit and the earnings for a home. So I propose a £10,000 dividend that goes in as a tax break or a savings match from a new sovereign wealth fund. If we had not got rid of all the North Sea oil, we'd have a sovereign wealth fund like 80 countries around the world.
That would cost a lot of money. I mean, how much do you think?
Well, I think you probably need a couple of £100 billion for a sovereign wealth fund, a bit like the Norwegians. But the point is that you could afford to build something like that carefully, slowly over time, if you restore fairness to the tax system. Rishi Sunak has published his tax returns.
Fairness to the tax system? Well, because people being fiscally dragged into the top rate of tax on 52 grand isn't fair, is it?
I'll give you a really good example. Exactly. So Rishi Sunak published his tax return a couple of years ago. That was a good thing for him to do. He declares an income of about £2 million a year. But what he also declared is that he only pays 21% tax on that. Now, at a time when 1 in 5 people are paying 40% tax, it doesn't seem right that those who are doing really, really well are paying half the rate of tax for everybody else. Now, there's lots of different ways that you can restore fairness to the tax system. The book goes into some of them. But the point is,
does restoring fairness mean just putting taxes up for people who are better off?
No, it means that those with the broader shoulders should pay a little bit more.
But would you want to bring that 40% tax rate down or change the threshold so that people who are on 52 grand, which are your teachers, senior teachers, admittedly head teachers, might be your police officers, might be the so-called squeezed middle. Doesn't seem right, does it, this fiscal drag that they're facing? So then you must be advocating bringing taxes down for those people.
I would like to see taxes on working people come down, but I would like to couple that with a way in which we give young people a flying start in life. Everybody wants a home to call their own. Right now, that is simply not affordable for most young people. And the point is, this isn't going to fix itself. That's the big message of the book. And if we don't take action now, this wealth inequality is going to get worse and worse and worse, and we will end up in a country of haves and have-nots and have-yachts. And I don't think in this country we're particularly comfortable with a land where some people are more equal than others.
Let's move on to the Post Office, because I know you've got a very important role this week in your capacity as chair of the Business Select
Big day on
Committee.
Tuesday.
Yeah, tell us what's happening.
So on Tuesday, we're bringing Fujitsu and the Post Office to the stand. They're coming in front of the House of Commons Select Committee on Business and Trade on Tuesday morning. We'll be hearing from Mr. Bates, and we are bringing together lots of evidence from sub-postmasters around the country, because the key thing that really worries me is that we're sort of 3 or 4 years on from the landmark trial now, but only 15% of the convictions have been overturned, and only 4% of the payments have been settled in a full and final way.
4% seems extraordinary. I know you've written about this in the Sunday Express.
Wrong.
You're saying justice delayed is justice denied. And also there's a discrepancy between what Kevin Hollingrake wants to do, which is compensate people by the end of August. Then we heard Rishi Sunak say, by the end of the year.
Yeah, so we've got, we've had a week of debate about this in the House of Commons, and there are still these big questions unanswered. And of course, one of those questions is what, frankly, should Fujitsu, that built this failing system, contribute to the compensation?
What do you think they should contribute? Because the taxpayer will be looking at this.
480 million, at least.
We're a major share in the Post Office. Why should we end up having to pay the price for the Post Office and indeed Fujitsu's mistakes? So are you saying you think Fujitsu should stomach this entire bill of compensation?
Well, I think it's clear that their system went wrong, and they surely must, at the very least, have a moral obligation to help contribute to that whacking great compensation bill. Because, as you say, why should taxpayers have to front up £500 million for a system that went, especially, now we don't know this, but if it's true that somebody in Fujitsu was waving a red flag, or they knew that something was going wrong, did they stay silent when innocent people were going to prison?
Although on that
subject, did they put profit before people?
Did your former Labour colleague Tony Blair stay silent when there were faults about the Horizon system that he was made aware of? We've seen him made a little note on a piece of paper that was handed to him by Jeremy Haywood, then the head of the Civil Service. And actually, they didn't put a halt on the Horizon project being rolled out because they were worried about offending the Japanese. Has Tony Blair got questions to answer? Maybe he should be hauled in front of your committee.
I think, so there is a judicial inquiry underway which is going to go into the deep history of who knew what and when. But I think the question for us on Tuesday is, how do we make sure that justice is delayed no longer? Parliament, I think, is of a clear view that these convictions need to be overturned and settlements need to be made. So we need to know, how fast is that going to happen? When is the new legislation going to arrive? And crucially, who the hell is going to pay for it?
Quick question, which I would require a yes or no answer to, please. Do you regret that note?
Of course.
So that's a straight yes. Thank you.
These are the notes I wish I'd left.
Well, indeed so. All right, so let's have a look at the notes. This is Liam's book. Am I handing him... Which one am I? Camera 5. There we are. There we are. The Inequality of Wealth. This is Liam Byrne's new book, and it's available from all good bookshops. Thank you very much for joining me this morning. Lovely to see you. Don't forget, I'm going to be back here in the shiny new studio from 9:30 next week. But up first, it's, of course, Michael Portillo from 11. Have a lovely day.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB